Hey guys, welcome into this episode of Saturdays Rewritten here on YouTube or your favorite podcast listening platform. Today we are diving into the Tennessee Volunteers. To me, one of the more intriguing programs, intriguing storylines coming into this 2025 season is Tennessee. I mean, we all saw the off-season headlines with Nico Iamaleava. Coach Heupel and the program basically said no to being held hostage, and I applaud them for it. But as a result, there is a lot of uncertainty, not only at the quarterback position, but the offense as a whole is kind of up in the air. It's a wild card. We don't know what we're looking at with the Tennessee Volunteers. Defensively, they could be strong, and schedule-wise, it could line up favorably. So there's a lot of varying opinions on where this program could go here in 2025. So let's talk about it. Let's dive in to the Tennessee Volunteers here on this episode. Buckle up. All right, before we dive into the Tennessee Volunteers, just really quickly, if you would consider subscribing to my channel down below and clicking that like button on this video, that's going to help me with the algorithm here. If you're listening on podcast, leave me that 5-star review, follow it, subscribe to it, whatever you do on podcast side of things, I don't know. But in any case, guys, thanks for being here. Okay, let's dive in. Tennessee football. You know, recently I watched a Josh Pate video on Tennessee football, which kind of gave me the inspiration for talking about Tennessee. From 2008 to 2021, he likened the Tennessee program to that of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness after they had escaped, after the good Lord had saved them from Egypt. There were 40 years in the wilderness. Tennessee, not quite that long, but still. 2008 to 2021, not a single double-digit win season for Tennessee. A very proud program, a program riddled with tradition, 6 national titles to their name. I mean, it seemed like a far cry from where they had been under Philip Fulmer. And Jeremy Pruitt really made things, it really put the nail into the coffin, as you could say, for those 13 years. What an exclamation mark. Fast forward to 2022 to 2024, though, under Josh Heupel, and the trajectory of this program is miles and miles above where it just was. In 2022 to 2024, he obviously took over in 2021. And by the way, he was only dealing with 60 scholarship players at that time. But 2022 to 2024, they are 30-9 during that time. That's incredible. It includes 10 wins over top 25 opponents. Quite a turnaround from the last decade, of inconsistency and mediocrity. What he has done in his time at Tennessee, in my mind, is nothing short of a miracle. Like, what a turnaround. Jeremy Pruitt, I already mentioned, he left the Vols in NCAA purgatory, in my mind. And again, Coach Heupel, for his first season, they went 7-6, but he had 60 players on scholarships. So, because he had to deal with the NCAA penalties and scholarship reductions his whole time at Tennessee. So for him to be 37-15 overall and 1 game short of the 14 playoff in 22, and then to make the playoffs in 24, yes, it's a 12-team expanded playoff, but still, it's nothing short of incredible. So all that to say, whether this season is a down year or not, in my mind, he has proven he can coach. So he should be given some grace on that. And every fan base has the unrealistic, crazy fans. A lot of Tennessee fans I've talked to are very supportive of Coach Heupel, even if Tennessee does drop off a little bit this year, and the drop-off I'm thinking of could be, at absolute worst, 7 wins. But I think it's probably going to be more like 8 or 9, which isn't bad. There are, of course, the unrealistic fans, though, who are just very critical of his losses to Georgia. How come we can't beat Georgia? We got to beat Georgia now. Come on. Guys, for those 13 years in the wilderness, Tennessee wasn't consistently beating a lot of people, okay? Again, no double-digit win seasons during those 13 years. And until recently, they weren't beating Alabama. And now Tennessee has won 2 of the last 3 years against Alabama. They got the proverbial monkey off their back with that one. So maybe in time, give them some time against Georgia. Kirby Smart, he's not, he's no slouch when it comes to coaching. And Georgia has just typically had more of the dominance in the trenches, which is where football is often won these days, offensive and defensive line, especially in the SEC. So let's cool our jets here. Give us a break when it comes to this Georgia talk. Tennessee's time will come. I personally have no doubt under Josh Heupel. There we go. But what about this season, 2025? Let's actually get into this and discuss what we're looking at here for the Volunteers this year. So, again, the big thing for me is the uncertainty on offense. There is so much changeover to this Tennessee Volunteers offense, not only with Nico Iamaleava, who's probably the obvious name that everyone knows about now. He is no longer there. He is off to UCLA, transferred in that, frankly, snake-like move. His family, his advisors blew that one. End of story. But there's not only the quarterback position, it's the wide receiver room. Tennessee lost 7 total players at wide receiver from last year. So the contributors that are going to be at the wide receiver spot this year, they've been with the team they were on the team last year, but still did not contribute a whole lot. There's some interesting pieces there. We'll talk about it in a second. But the offensive line, too. The offensive line has lost 4 of 5 starters from last year. A lot of departures on this offense. So that to me is a big question mark for this team. And they, on quarterback side of things, it's looking like it's going to be the transfer from App State, Joey Aguilar. He was a standout at App State. He's likely going to be the one who comes out on top of this one. In my mind, for the SEC, you want a guy who's been battle tested, even though he hasn't started for one of those power 4 school. Just the fact that he's been through so many ups and downs that a quarterback's going to have to face in the SEC. In my mind, Aguilar makes the most sense. They do have a couple other guys, Jake Merklinger and true freshman George McIntyre, who's highly recruited, 4-star kid. But he's 6'6", 190. Give him some time to put some meat on his bones before you throw him to the SEC. That's kind of what my gut tells me. So Aguilar, the presumed front runner, he's probably going to be at least apply some solidity to this offense. For pass catchers, I already mentioned 7 guys gone from last year's wide receiving room. But as far as some guys that jump out to me, Mike Matthews, he's a former 5-star recruit, and redshirt freshman Braylon Staley, likely starting receivers. But last year, they only combined for 10 total catches. So again, yes, they were on the team last year, but they weren't able to contribute that much because Tennessee had some weapons on the outside already. So they're really hoping that some of those guys will emerge on that one. There is a newcomer to watch, junior transfer Chris Brazel II, 6'4" receiver. He had a mixed season in 2024 and could provide some veteran presence on the outside. So there's the receiving room. The offensive line, I already mentioned, they enter a period of transition. They've imported multiple transfers to bolster the unit, including Wendell Moore Jr., redshirt junior from Arizona, and Sam Pendleton, a Notre Dame transfer, to compete for the interior, likely at that center or offensive guard spot. And whenever I hear a Notre Dame transfer, I get excited because Notre Dame's kind of lineman U in my mind. Used to be Wisconsin that was up there. But in any case, so he's likely going to get some consistent playing time. The Vols could be too deep up front it'll largely consist of experienced transfers, plus an assembly line of redshirt freshmen and sophomores, this according to ESPN's Bill Connolly. So, it sounds like they could cobble together a decent offensive line. But again, it could just go in so many different directions. We've seen horror stories where, an offensive line with not a lot of cohesion, it just doesn't work. It happens from time to time. But I think Josh Heupel, he's a brilliant offensive mind. If somebody could make it work, it's probably him. So, the backfield, obviously, you lose Dylan Sampson. That is a lot of production to replace, but they've got Deshaun Bishop and Peyton Lewis. They've impressed the staff and could potentially, maybe not replicate Samson's production, but do so by committee. So it seems like we're looking at more of a committee presence for Tennessee this year on that end. Yeah, that's kind of the overall gist I'm getting from the offense. I just don't know where it's going to go, and we're going to find out pretty quickly, I think. Week 1, kind of an underrated matchup. Tennessee, you're taking on Syracuse to start things, and Syracuse is, don't get me wrong, Syracuse is not a blue blood per se, but they've been solid the last couple of years. That's a solid team to start off against. In my mind, you don't want to start off against William and Mary or Furman or who know, one of those FCS schools that you're just supposed to kick the crap out of and move on. You get an actual test in Atlanta, and then you got ETSU in the home opener before matching up against Georgia at home, week 3. In my mind, that's where we're going to see the real meat of this Tennessee team. We're going to see, is Tennessee actually a dark horse contender, or have they taken a step back and we're maybe looking at an 8-win season? That's, in my mind, what we're looking at here. But let's jump into their schedule. I think Tennessee's schedule, for the most part, is pretty favorable. Now, SEC schedule is just brutal regardless, but Tennessee is 15th out of 16 teams with regards to strength of schedule in the SEC. So they have one of the easiest schedules by SEC standards. This, of course, is all based on data and whatnot. So it's still going to be tough. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they have a cakewalk of a schedule, because at the end of the day, they have to play Alabama on the road. They've got to play Georgia at home. They've got to play Oklahoma at home. They've got Florida on the road, which I think is a very underrated, tough game. There's tests in this schedule, no doubt. But if they are able to take care of business at home, and if they're able to split one of those really tough road games at Alabama or at Florida, who's to say? That's why I think that this is such a wide range for Tennessee. In my mind, I probably tend to lean more towards the 8 or 9 win mark, but college football is a crazy sport. You guys have seen it. Defensively, I'm a little bit more excited for Tennessee. Tennessee brings back 15 players who all contributed pretty handsomely to last year's defense. And I think in the secondary is where we could be looking at a really experienced group that if all things come together and McCoy's knee, he's able to heal and reintegrate back into the defense, to some extent like he was last year, we could be looking at one of the best defenses in the SEC. Just throwing that out there. So if Tennessee has that to build upon, gives the offense some time to come into their own, you could argue that Tennessee could be a dark horse. I see some of the optimism there. Let's talk about the Vegas odds makers. Vegas odd makers paint a relatively optimistic picture. The over-under for Tennessee is set at 8.5 out of 12, and that number was initially 9.5, by the way, early in the offseason, but they adjusted it when Nico Iamaleava transferred. So an 8.5 win total might not sound great when you first hear that, but when you consider in context that it's the 4th highest in the SEC, trailing only Texas, Georgia, and Alabama, each of whom are at 9.5, over under. That's pretty dang good. In other words, Las Vegas expects Tennessee to be one of the better teams in the league, even if a notch below the very elite. For context, key SEC rival Florida has a win total of 7.5. SEC newcomer Oklahoma, whom UT hosts in November, is at 6.5. This typically, in my mind, if we're just looking at these numbers, that means Tennessee is supposed to be favored in a lot of their games this year. Now, obviously, that's not how it works. Florida, I just mentioned, I think Florida is going to be probably pretty good, but they have such a brutal schedule. For context, Gator fans, before you get angry, I understand Florida has a brutal schedule just like last year. Florida fans are probably looking at this schedule and thinking, what a cupcake schedule. You guys can argue about it in the comments. But when we look at the overall odds, Tennessee, they have a 1,300 or a plus 1,300 to win the SEC, 13-1, 6th best in the conference. and around 33 plus 3,300 odds, or 33 to 1 to win the national title. There's still some respect there to be had in Vegas. For comparison, Georgia and Texas are co-favorites in the SEC odds, while Alabama and LSU are also ahead of UT. So Tennessee is seen as a dark horse contender that would need to upset the pecking order to win the conference. Tennessee, I don't know. There's some optimism there. The schedule, in my mind, could have been much worse. It sets up nicely. They gotta show what they're made of against Georgia when Georgia comes to town. And Tennessee's defense could keep it close. So the offense is just the big question mark for me. Who's going to come out on top at quarterback? I think it's Aguilar. Is he going to be able to lead this offense of a ton of new faces up and down the field? How are they going to mesh together? In Josh Heupel, we trust, in my mind. I think Tennessee does have reason for optimism, but I'm probably down towards the 8 or 9 win mark. That's just kind of what my gut tells me. I think, Tennessee, if they make some things happen, if they pull off, if they split one of those 2 road games of Alabama and Florida, if they win their home games and split one of those 2 games, this could be another contending type team. But I just got to see something first. That's kind of my mind with Tennessee. So a lot to be excited about, ladies and gentlemen. Now, before we wrap up, I got married, y'all. I got married on July 19th to the lovely Kendra Hardy, who's now down here in Alabama with me. She and I were both on the same circles up in Idaho. We got married in beautiful Moscow, Idaho. Very blessed. Proverb says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and receives blessing from the Lord. So all you single men out there, go get married. But that's why I disappeared for a few weeks. So we're back. The honeymoon in Punta Cana down in the Dominican Republic was lovely. Really hot for us gingers. I got a lovely sunburn while I was down there. Probably with some sun poisoning too. But in any case, I am back now, so expect weekly episodes to resume. That's the hope. Expect some collabs coming up here as well as I continue to start pumping out some content. I'm still working on some special documentary style content in the background. So stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of fun stuff coming, and college football is almost here. Thank you, Jesus. Can't wait to dive into it with you all. Who do you guys think I should cover next? Comment down below. And until then, like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.